November 16th, 1981, 4 o'clock p.m., the White House Cabinet Room. Vice President George Bush sits next to President Reagan. Around the table, you've got Secretary of State Alexander Haig, Defense Secretary Caspar Weinberger, CIA Director William Bill Casey, and a man most Americans have never heard of before, Konstantin Menzies, newly appointed as the CIA's intelligence chief for Latin America. You have Dwayne Dewey Claridge, just promoted to run CIA's Latin American division, and Roger Fontaine, who is the NSC staff handling the region. Now, on the table out in front of them is a Dutch newspaper called the Amigo, 24 hours old, and the headline reads, "Suriname and Cuba to strengthen relations." By the time the meeting ends, less than 3 hours from now, they will have authorized covert operation across 3 continents. The official record lists what was approved. You had economic support for Central America and Caribbean countries, about $250 to $300 million. You had military assistance to El Salvador and Honduras, coming in around $50 million. There was military training for indigenous units and leaders both in and out of the country. This is going to be something of paramount importance when we talked about the Suriname Contras that will be coming in, because they were considered indigenous units, pro-democracy freedom fighters. We'll talk about who they are. You also have support for democratic forces in Nicaragua, setting up a more intelligence gathering across the Caribbean basin, and improved military preparedness against Cuba, and developing contingency plans for action against them if they start to infiltrate countries like Suriname. So how does a morning newspaper announcement trigger a global covert war within a matter of 24 hours? Well, the answer is this. It wasn't a response to that specific crisis. It was a system that had been deployed, a machine built piece by piece over the previous 10 months, just waiting for the right tripwire moment to activate. My name is Matthew Smith, and I grew up next door to the dictator that this very machine was intended to destroy. And in this episode, I'm going to show you exactly how they built it and why a small country trying to figure out its independence got crushed in the gears. Welcome to the Suriname Contra affair. The crisis in Suriname didn't end when those planes left the tarmac in February in 1980. For Washington, it really had just begun. Those 3 Araya aircraft that were trapped at Zanderij airport, the ones that were keeping America's most secret nuclear weapons, that routine U.S. refueling stop started to look very different to the Carter and then the Reagan administration. Because that same runway that could land Americans' most advanced aircraft could also easily land Soviet bombers. That same refueling stop that supported the U.S. nuclear missions could also send Castro's troops to fight in Angola and Ethiopia. Assistant Secretary Charles Gillespie later confirmed this fact when he said, quote, "We had intelligence that the Cubans were sniffing around in Suriname. The Cubans were in Angola and moving in and out of Angola. And one of the problems that Cubans had was finding way stations en route to Africa for refueling and that kind of thing. And Zanderij had a big airport which was perceived to be very attractive to the Cubans." So this wasn't theoretical. By mid-1981, Cuban military advisors were already in Suriname. But the fear wasn't just geopolitical, it was also a corporate fear. Because for decades, Suriname had been a treasure trove for America. The Aluminum Company of America, shortened into Alcoa, had operated there since 1916. Bauxite made up 80% of Suriname's export earnings, and overnight, 16 Sergeant with stolen guns had seized control of all of it. Then, just weeks after the Zanderij incident, the nightmare scenario unfolded in America. March 14th, 1980, warning systems at the National Military Command Center lit up like a Christmas tree. Soviet missiles appeared to be streaking towards North America. The Strategic Air Command went on high alert. The Doomsday plane rolled out at 9:32 p.m. But it was a false alarm. General William Oldham delivered a terrifying assessment to President Carter. He said, quote, "Our command control, communications, and intelligence system vulnerability is extremely serious. A small Soviet attack could make it virtually impossible for the surviving National Command Authority to retaliate for days, weeks, perhaps even months. President Jimmy Carter knew that the system was broken and he had to fix it. Within 4 months of the Zanderij incident, Carter launched an emergency preparedness revolution. It started with Operation Treetop, which abandoned this fixed bunker mentality, which the Soviets had already targeted, and it created mobile teams to evacuate presidential successors to random locations. So the new doctrine is mobility, redundancy, dispersal. You had to make Soviet targeting a nightmare. And in May of 1990, Carter ordered Exercise 9 Lives. This was the first comprehensive test, a full-scale response to a rapidly deteriorating worldwide situation leading to potential nuclear war. So this all culminated in a new presidential directive number 58, which was signed in June of 1980. And this directive mandated that the government must be able to survive the nuclear attack, even one that involved repeated attacks over a long period of time. Number 2, it had to direct our strategic and theater nuclear forces and control domestic affairs during a conflict and the national recovery afterwards. So National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski called it a major revision of the entire strategic doctrine, the third one since World War II. The old doctrine had imagined nuclear war as a single catastrophic event, a spasm war that would be over in a few hours. This new framework prepared for a prolonged conflict requiring sustained leadership. Presidential Directive 58 was part of a suite of directives that transformed U.S. strategy. It was a move away from mutual assured destruction, where both nations just blow each other up in an all-or-nothing approach, towards a more managed, extended global crisis approach while preserving command continuity. And in plain English, it means they're trying to make sure that if the president, vice president, and the cabinet gets taken out, who's going to take over and continue the American government in the war against the adversaries in this prolonged engagement. So what Carter had forged was ultimately a shield. Secure communications, autonomous funding, pre-delegated authorities that could operate outside of the conventional constitutional channels. But there was also one more piece. In April of 1980, during the Iran hostage crisis, the U.S. Army created an intelligence support activity, the ISA. It was a covert unit designed to help operate outside of normal CIA findings and congressional oversight. Think about going into other countries to do secret missions to get out hostages or other kidnapped victims using things like the Delta Force teams and similar organizations, but this was a super secretive group. So what Carter had ultimately created as a scalpel for emergency situations, his successor in the Reagan administration would turn into a Swiss Army knife capable of all kinds of covert ops. So when Reagan took office in January of 1981, he inherited that Carter architecture, and he had just the man in mind to weaponize it. So the real revolutionary wasn't Reagan. Everybody thinks of the actor, the Hollywood star, riding in on a white horse with his cowboy hat on. Reagan was great at delivering speeches, the anti-communist rhetoric, and always had a great joke, looked great on camera. It's everybody central casting would pick for a president in a movie. But he wasn't the real revolutionary. That was his vice president, George Bush. Now, you got to remember, George Bush had spent since 1976 as a CIA director. He was brought in to restore morale, put the shine back on the CIA after the Church Committee had exposed everything the CIA had been doing since World War II. We're talking about MK Ultra and COINTELPRO and their assassination programs, exploding cigars and poisoning Castro's beard and making it fall out. All these different wild plans. They looked bad, and he was going to clean it up and improve morale. Bush knew exactly what kind of constraints the CIA was under after the Church Committee. So when he became vice president, he really didn't want to play a ceremonial role. He wanted to be president. That's why he ran against Reagan. He didn't want to just be some placeholder. To understand why Bush and his team were so interested in Suriname and saw it as an urgent threat, you need to understand the worldview they're coming from. First and foremost, let's unpack a little bit the religious worldview of that time and of this group. Most of the people who were part of this moral majority, this far-right coalition of evangelical Christians, were under the impression that they were living in the end times. We recently got done with a week here in America where social media was littered with all these influencers talking about how the rapture was supposed to happen a week ago. So they thought they were going to be taken off the planet, meeting Jesus in the air, and go back to heaven. This was the same thing that President Reagan thought, and you can read back in interviews with him in 1982. He thought that Armageddon was at hand. There was going to be a nuclear war. He was fighting on the side of God and Jesus, and it was his job to win that nuclear war. Now, add to the mix the fact that, and this is the same with Oliver North and same with a lot of the people who were part of that conservative right-wing element at the time. But add to the mix, you also got Ronald Reagan's wife, Nancy Reagan, who is a biggest believer in astrology. So she has her own astrologist, and that's another rabbit hole, who's reading the charts and telling her key dates and key information that she's relaying to Ronald Reagan that's important about when they should act and what they should do based upon the stars. So apocalypse, rapture, stargazing, all folding into national security policy and decisions that might impact the future of the world. Anyways, that's what we're dealing with from a religious point of view. Now, at the 1980 Republican National Convention, Reagan declared, quote, "For those who've abandoned all hope, we're going to restore hope again, and we're going to welcome them into a great national crusade to make America great again." Reagan and Bush were the first to use this. Now, some have traced that back even earlier, maybe to Truman, but they popularized the MAGA slogan in their 1980 presidential campaign. It wasn't just a slogan, though. It was a diagnosis. And America, in Reagan and Bush's view, was in decline. The Soviets were ultimately ascending. In 1975, you had Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia. They had all fallen to communist forces. In 75, Angola falls, and Cuban troops are fighting on the ground. Then you have Ethiopia's revolution. That brings in a Marxist regime. In 1979, Nicaragua, Sandinistas take power. 79 again, Grenada has Maurice Bishop and the New Jewel movement that align with Cuba. And then Suriname happens, and within 24 hours, there are Cuban boots on the ground offering support. From Reagan and Bush's perspective, this is not paranoia. The Soviets themselves are boasting about the correlation of forces changing in their favor. Soviet expenditures in the third world are skyrocketing. And there was a doctrine behind this whole thing. It was called the Brezhnev Doctrine. It was announced in 1968. And basically it said that wherever socialism takes power, the Soviet bloc has every right to defend it. So communist gains were irreversible. History only moves in one direction. By 1980, Boris Ponomarev, the chairman of the Soviet Communist Party's international department, was declaring, "The world's on fire. National liberation movements are doing really well. Wherever communist movements are making progress, we have a duty to reinforce them." Now, Reagan's team, Bush, Casey, Haig, Weinberger, they all had watched the dominoes fall. They believed in maybe 2 years or so that the Soviet consolidation across the Caribbean basin would become permanent. So that apocalyptic urgency would drive everything that followed. Now, while Washington saw Soviet expansion, something very different was happening in Paramaribo. Desi Bouterse and his fellow sergeants had overthrown what they deemed a corrupt government in February of 1980. They'd promised to drain the swamps themselves, rid Suriname of its colonial ties once and for all, but they had no idea how to actually govern. You got to remember, Bouterse himself was a chicken farmer and a pig farmer. He was an amazing athlete. He had played basketball back in the Netherlands. He was a long distance runner. He was involved in judo and boxing, but his world was athletics and farming, not running a country. But now he found himself in control with his fellow NCOs. Bouterse was clever. They'd call him a Wakaman. He was a street smart youth who'd grown up on the streets, knew the ways of power, knew how to consolidate power, and was always seeing the angles of how he could potentially ladder up and hold on to power. So he wasn't really an ideologist. He had others like Sital on his team in the NCOs that were more aligned with Cuban or Marxist communist ideologies. but Bouterse really wasn't that so much. In May of 1981, they decided to visit Cuba. Him and his foreign minister, Harvey Narendorf, they traveled to Cuba to meet with Fidel Castro. They were looking for guidance. During that meeting, Castro started asking them all kinds of detailed questions. He was asking them, how many teachers do you have per capita? What are your school dropout rates? And what are your economic statistics? Basic governance data. And Bouterse didn't have answers. They didn't know. So Narendorf later described the meeting as getting a cold shower from Castro. He said it made them realize they were nowhere near ready to have a nation state. But here's what Mies did not know. Years later, there was a retired CIA officer who informed Harvey Narendorf of something stunning. He said that the CIA had placed someone inside of their delegation on the trip to Cuba. So the CIA was already running human intelligence operations inside Bouterse's inner circle by May of 1981. After Cuba, Bouterse makes a secret detour to Grenada to meet the revolutionary Prime Minister Maurice Bishop. And when he returned to Suriname, he announced that there would be no more elections, not even the ones that were promised for 1982. On May 1st, 1981, the radical left Palu Party published the Manifest for the Revolution, branding all the former politicians of the Aryan regime and wealthy people in the country, a lot of the Hindu business owners of the time, as counter-revolutionaries. And days later, Bouterse created the Policy Center, which was an alternative government that sidelined the more moderate President Chin Sen. Now, a little bit of another couple of quick side notes here, which will become important, one of which is Maurice Bishop. This guy is going to be a critical player in this story, and partly because he's tall, he's handsome, he was educated in, I believe, universities over in England somewhere. He spoke perfect English, which made him extremely dangerous from an American point of view, because he is espousing Marxist ideologies across the Caribbean. The Reagan administration is worried it's going to spread. Not only that, but his message is reaching America, where it's resonating with the poor. The Black Power movement that's happening at the time. This message of kind of going back to African roots and finding common shared identity before everything was divided through language and other colonial means. This is really resonating back in America. That makes it difficult if you're trying to rally support to fight and invade countries like Grenada and Suriname, because now you have people in America calling their Congress people and saying that doesn't make any sense. Reagan's trying to raise money from the churches to invade or destabilize on these committees, and he's getting pushback, and Maurice Bishop is part of that equation. Meanwhile, you have President Henk Chin Sen, who had never really been a politician outside of maybe being head of a soccer team or a soccer club or something like that. He was a doctor. He had actually been the doctor for Bouterse's second-in-command, Roy Horb. He had been his childhood doctor. Roy Horb had actually babysitted his children while he was away. So those two were very close, which will become important later on. But Henk Chin Sen was visited by former Ambassador Nancy Ostrander right after the Sergeant's coup. She gave him the American stamp of approval. She said, "You're the kind of person we want. We want a moderate in place." And this was very important, the timing of it, because after a few months, Henk Chin Sen was becoming disillusioned with his ceremonial role as figurehead in Suriname, was thinking about leaving until the ambassador came and spoke with him, and he decided to stay. And he's also fighting his own second in command, which was his college friend, Andre Hochman, who was a former attorney who had his own aspirations for power in Suriname. So there's that infighting. We can set that aside for later, but just to set yourself some context here. So by June of 1981, you have Havana establishing an official diplomatic mission in Paramaribo, the capital of Suriname. Now, to the Reagan administration, this looked exactly like what had happened in Grenada. You had Maurice Bishop and his New Jewel movement. They'd taken power in 79. Within months, hundreds of Cubans start showing up on the island. Treaties are being made with the Soviet bloc. A whole new runway capable of handling Soviet bombers was being built. Bishop said it was for tourism because they needed other forms of income outside of bananas. But America didn't buy that. They thought it was strictly for military reasons. There was also the matter of the strategic positioning and the threat to the U.S. sea lanes that was happening at the time. Grenada's location placed it right at key sea lanes through which a significant portion of the U.S. oil imports were passing. So any airfield that was capable of supporting military or Soviet aircraft would have been seen as a direct threat to these vital commercial and military routes. Then you have Soviet anti-submarine warfare. CIA analyst Dewey Claridge noted that the long runway was ideal for Soviet long-range anti-submarine warfare aircraft, which could then patrol mid and South Atlantic, an area where the U.S. was deploying nuclear submarines, as we talked about on the last Trident missile launch episode, as a strategic deterrent against the Soviet Union. All of that was at risk at this moment, and becoming more so with the closer that Suriname was creeping towards the Soviet Union. So from Washington's perspective, these were not two separate problems. Suriname and Grenada were flip sides of the same coin. Two Caribbean nations, both being systematically converted into Soviet staging areas. But from Paramaribo's perspective, they were just trying to figure out how to govern a newly independent nation. They were looking to Cuba, Grenada, Nicaragua, and other nations who had also won their independence and were trying out new models. But there was no room in Cold War Washington for that kind of learning on the job. No room for a shared brotherhood, unfettered from colonial divisions. America saw these nations only through red-colored glasses, as threats to America's backyard. Meanwhile, Hank Chinesen, literally America's choice for president, who had been convinced to stay, he was fighting off his own coup attempts that we talked to. Suriname's whole post-colonial experiment was being crushed between these internal power struggles and these external superpower pressures. On May 22nd, 1981, President Reagan held a National Security Council meeting explicitly titled The U.S. Policy for the Caribbean Basin. You had Vice President Bush, Alexander Haig, Casey, Weinberger, all of them present. And Secretary Haig outlined the proposal plan, stating that its goal was to deal with the underlying conditions that made Cuban-style subversion even possible. So the meeting specifically addressed how to best keep Nicaragua from becoming an entirely creature of the Soviet Union and Cuba. So this was what would become known as the Reagan Doctrine, taking shape, the framework that would justify interventions from Grenada to Nicaragua to Afghanistan to Angola. The doctrine was specific. It was providing aid, both lethal and non-lethal, to anti-communist insurgents fighting Soviet-backed governments in the Third World. But this wasn't just about stopping the expansion of the Soviets. This was about a rollback strategy. They were actively trying to reverse communist gains, something that hadn't been seriously attempted since the 1950s. The Brezhnev Doctrine had declared communist victories were irreversible, and the Reagan Doctrine said, we'll see about that. They aimed to prove them wrong. So by the summer of 1981, CIA Director Bill Casey was frustrated. In a meeting in Paris, he found a new man for the job. That's Dewey Claridge. He was the station chief in Rome. Now, Claridge had some brass balls. He was what they would call a can-do cowboy. And Casey gave him a direct order. You report directly to me. Years later, Claridge would describe what his mandate was. He said, quote, the Soviets weren't going to come over and invade. What you were going to have is their covert action apparatus would create a situation where you would have a government come into power which was favorable to them. So that's what Casey saw happening in Suriname. And Casey's going to become a key player in the whole Suriname story that's going to unfold. He saw the long runways, the Cuban advisors, the potential Soviet submarine bases in the South Atlantic. In July of 1981, with this in mind, he brought a plan to the Senate Intelligence Committee. It was a covert action proposal targeting both Grenada and Suriname. And this was a year and a half before, almost 2 years before, Grenada would be invaded in October of 1983. Now, when Senator Lloyd Benston heard about this, his reaction was, "You have got to be kidding me." The committee said an emphatic no. They wanted more justification, clearer evidence, assurances that international law was being abided by. This was in the post-church committee world, and things were working as they were supposed to be working. You had checks and balances, you had oversight, you had accountability. For the Reagan team, these checks and balances were infuriating. From their perspective, it's Armageddon. They didn't have time for more justification. The dominoes were falling. The Soviet consolidation was happening here and now. So they decided to build a system where they wouldn't have to ask for permission anymore. Meanwhile, other pieces are falling into place. On August 4th, 1981, Marine Major Oliver North was reported to the NSC. He was assigned to Special Operations and Counterterrorism. In September 81, Casey appointed Constantine Menges as the CIA's National Intelligence Officer for Latin America. Menges had already published his Worldview. He thought that Cuba was fomenting terrorism and revolution in Central America. The Democratic senators would later accuse him of politicizing his intelligence reports. But that was the whole point. Casey wanted analysts who saw the world as a battlefield between freedom and communism, with no room for nuance. By the fall of 1981, the pieces were all in place on the chessboard. Claridge was running operation. Menges was providing intelligence report. Oliver North was coordinating at the NSC. The machine was operational. It just needed the right trigger event. But even within the Reagan administration, there wasn't absolute unity. You had Secretary of State George Shultz. He was frequently opposing the covert operations Casey and Bush were planning. Shultz favored diplomacy, regional peace plans, negotiated settlements, labor union. One Reagan advisor later recalled that Shultz and Casey frequently were at odds over the Reagan Doctrine. Shultz always tried to keep diplomacy primary. If there was a nasty guerrilla war going on somewhere backed by the Soviets, he wanted diplomacy to effect a comprehensive ceasefire and withdrawal. But to Bush and Casey, that approach meant accepting Soviet gains as permanent while talking about comprehensive peace. The NSC-centered structure, with Bush chairing the Special Situations Group, with Casey reporting directly to the president, with North coordinating outside of normal channels, allowed them to bypass Shultz entirely when necessary. So this wasn't just about bypassing Congress, who was telling them no about invading Suriname. It was about bypassing their own Secretary of State. So on November 10th, President Reagan convened his national security team to discuss comprehensive covert operations across Central America. The meeting went on for hours. There was discussion of military force, economic pressure, contingency planning, and then right at the end, Reagan asked the question that would define everything. He said, "What other covert actions could be taken that would be truly disabling and not just flea bites?" That's the President of the United States asking his team, what can we do that is actually disabling? So he pushed for even more aggressive options. He said, can we take more training exercises? Can we introduce a few battalions into Panama or Honduras? When he's talking about training exercises, they had been running war games in the Caribbean, getting fleets of ships and exercises as a military show of might, flying the eagles, they would call it. And he wanted to do more of that. When he said, can we introduce a few battalions into Panama or Honduras, he then added, I don't want to back down. I don't want to accept defeat. 5 days later, everything ultimately changed. On November 15th, 1981, the morning edition of the Amigo hit the stands. The headline read, Suriname and Cuba to strengthen relations. The details in that article said that 3 days of talks between President Henk Chinesen and Foreign Minister Harvey Narendorp with a Cuban delegation headed by Foreign Minister Ricardo Alarcon. Both countries will accredit chargé d'affaires in Paramaribo and Havana. The Cuban delegation included someone named Osvaldo Cardenas, the Cuban Communist Party member for Caribbean relations. But that's not how Reagan's administration saw him. They viewed him as one of Castro's top intelligence officers. And Deputy Foreign Minister Alarcon, used the press conference to warn that in the face of the United States threat, his government was taking important measures to defend itself. That announcement reached Washington, D.C., November 15th, 1981. At 4 o'clock the next day, November 16th, President Reagan's National Security Council convened in the cabinet room. So a morning diplomatic announcement triggered an afternoon meeting that would authorize worldwide covert action within 24 hours. Now, that's not how bureaucracies normally work. Maybe it's a coincidence. Maybe they already had it scheduled, but it happened within 24 hours of that announcement. And that's the kind of way that things happen when things are already in place, waiting for the tripwire event. So let's just take a look again who was in that room. You had President Ronald Reagan, Vice President George Bush, Secretary of State Alexander Haig, Defense Secretary Caspar Weinberger, CIA Director William Casey, and then you had the operators. You had Dwayne Dewey Claridge, who was the CIA's Director of Latin American Division, Constantine Menzies, Intelligence Officer Roger Fontaine, Tom Enders from the State Department, and Nestor Sanchez from Defense. So everyone who would ultimately run the covert operations, all in one room, all receiving authorization simultaneously. 3 days later, there came out a memorandum for the record which listed the decisions. Economic support for the Central American Caribbean countries, agreement to use $50 million to increase the military assistance to El Salvador and Honduras, military training for indigenous units, support of democratic forces in Nicaragua, stepping up intelligence collections in the Caribbean, improving military preparedness against Cuba, creating a public information task force, all authorized in a single meeting with a single purpose. The very next day, November 17th, a smaller group met again. It was decided to convert the sensitive items under point 4 into a single sentence general formula. Translation, they deliberately obscured what had been authorized so that Congress wouldn't understand the full scope of what they were going to try to pull off. Support democratic forces in Nicaragua became code for building a 1,500-man paramilitary army funded through Argentina with the explicit goal to liberate the country. This was systematic deception of the legislative branch beginning within 24 hours of the authorization itself. But how had they built a system that could respond so quickly? How had they gone from Congress said no in July to global covert operations authorized by November? And the answer to that lies in what George Bush had been building in the shadows since January. When Bush became vice president, he wanted to fix what he saw as a fundamental weakness of American covert ops, which was too much oversight, too much bureaucracy. And the solution he came up to was kind of elegant. It was to create parallel authorities that could operate in real time without normal delays. It wasn't a conspiracy in the truest sense of the word, but an administrative coup carried out through perfectly legal presidential directives. It all started on February 25th, 1981, exactly 1 year after the Suriname Coup, with National Security Directive Number 1. Buried in the details, it gave Vice President Bush unprecedented control over crisis management and established his authority to chair senior interagency groups, essentially these shadow national security councils. Then came 3 more directives. You had National Security Decision Directive Number 2, signed January 12, 1982, and that shifted national security issues from the State Department over to the NSC. It established these crisis pre-planning groups that could coordinate multi-theater operations without traditional oversight. And that's where Oliver North gained his power. Then you got the masterpiece, National Security Directive Number 3, technically signed a couple weeks earlier on December 14th, 1981. It was officially about crisis management procedures, but in reality, it created the Special Situation Group, the SSG, chaired by President Bush with the authority to respond to national security crises without going through the normal channels. Now, the press paid notice of this. The Washington Post reported that the SSG had met secretly on the day martial law was declared in Poland. So this was before the White House formally admitted that the group even existed. White House Communications Director David Gergen called them NSC-1 meetings, so ultimately shadow national security councils without the president. The Christian Science Monitor noted that Bush's SSG had at least 2 other meetings over the last 6 months, showing that the apparatus was functioning as a parallel cabinet long before its legal foundation was publicly acknowledged. Bush needed one more key piece. He needed a framework for justifying bypassing normal oversight. And in 1981, in April, Secretary of State Alexander Haig made a comment that's kind of chilling when you look back at it. He said, "International terrorism will replace human rights as our primary concern." I'm going to repeat that one. International terrorism will replace human rights as our primary concern. Yeah. Now, that's not just a policy preference. That's the operational framework being announced. They were about to redefine any opposition to American interest as terrorism. And once they did that, all bets were off. On December 4th, 1981, Reagan signed Executive Order 12333, which unleashed intelligence agencies by loosening restrictions on domestic surveillance and covert operations. Newsweek described it at the time as putting the CIA on a looser leash. The Christian Science Monitor reported that 109 civil liberties, religious, and foreign affairs group condemned the action as it risked returning the business of helping to overthrow foreign governments, which the Church Committee had tried to rein in. So you kind of see the pattern here. This is like every directive individually seems pretty reasonable. It's all crisis management, intelligence reform, terrorism preparedness, ensuring continuity of government in the light of a nuclear war. These were real threats that were happening. I'm not trying to downplay this. Even if you are radically inclined to see this through an apocalyptic lens, it doesn't change the fact that there's real nukes that are being pointed at America. It doesn't change the fact that there were real kidnapping and real hostage situations, that the president himself had undergone an assassination attempt at that time. So I'm not downplaying this, but I'm saying is that the old expression is don't let any good crisis go to waste. The president and his cabinet were not letting this crisis go to waste. They were seeing this as an opportunity to do the things they wanted to do without the normal constraints on executive power. So by that meeting in November 16th, after the Curacao paper, the Amigo hit, Bush's machine was operational. That's why the meeting could authorize global operations in a single afternoon. The system was already built. The Cuba-Suriname Pact didn't create the response. It triggered the deployment of the capabilities constructed over the previous 10 months. But there was another constraint. Laws required presidential findings for covert operations. On December 1st, 1981, just 15 days after that November meeting, the president signed a presidential finding. According to intelligence historian Malcolm Byrne, it was deliberately written to camouflage the true scope of operations that had been authorized. You can see this in the declassified version. There's black magic marker on top of the existing classification. In Byrne's analysis, the finding was systematic deception. It vaguely mentioned paramilitary operations, but completely omitted the broader political operations or the goal of building opposition fronts that had been secretly authorized, including opposition fronts that were going to emerge in Suriname. So Congress was told about military aid to anti-Sandinista forces, but not about the comprehensive political warfare campaign designed to overthrow multiple governments across the region. We'll get into later. Now, some members of Congress smelled a rat. On December 11th, 1981, 3 Democratic senators, Paul Tsongas, Claiborne Pell, and Christopher Dodd, wrote to CIA Director Bill Casey. They charged that a closed CIA briefing had seriously violated the agency's obligation to provide objective analysis. Konstantin Menzies had given what amounted to a policy speech with use of selective information. The Associated Press reported that Tsongas walked out calling the report an insult. The same administration, supposedly defending democracy against communist tyranny, was systematically lying to democratically elected representatives about its own actions. Because the Reagan administration had decided that constitutional constraints were incompatible with effective anti-communist strategy. So they built a system to bypass those constraints. But all of this still had one potential vulnerability, and that is the eventual disclosure. Unless you change the rules about the secrets themselves. On April 2nd, 1982, Reagan signed Executive Order 12356, fundamentally transforming the way government documents and secrets are classified. I'm going to put it up on the screen here. I'm going to call it the secret system, SCRT. Make it easy for us to remember. The S stands for secrecy standards that were reversed. The default standard for documents became secrecy unless there was a compelling reason to declassify them. So before, this would have been reserved for documents like the Manhattan Project and other ultra secret things. Now they were being used on a broader scale. C, classification criteria was expanded. So you had vague categories like foreign policy that could justify classifying almost everything. The R, reclassification authorized. So documents that had already been declassified could be reclassified. Information that journalists had already reported on could be retroactively deemed secret again. And then the T, the timetables were eliminated. It used to be that there was automatic declassification time tables, and those were eliminated. So think about it like an expiration date on the milk. Once it got to a certain date, those documents would be declassified and the public would be able to see them. They did away with that, which is the reason why here in 2025, we still can't get access to documents from 1980 and 1981, and we have to file a Freedom of Information Act request that could take 10 years, because that's the kind of backlog. So you're dealing with 50-year declassification schedules that didn't exist, but Reagan administration put that into place because they wanted to do more things and they didn't want to get busted for it and didn't want to get called out for it. That's in essence what happened. So this created this ideal ecosystem for a shadow presidency. Reagan issued over 280 national security decision directives. Compare that to Carter, who had done 63 national presidential directives. Unlike executive orders, which are published and subject to judicial review, the NSDDs are inherently secret. There's no public disclosure, there's no congressional approval, there's oftentimes no official oversight. So some, like NSDD 17, authorized the Contras. That eventually became infamous in the Iran-Contra affair. Others remain buried to this day, like NSDD 61, which we'll get into. Even the titles of some of these things are still classified, which is why you never hear these stories. Not because they didn't happen, but because they built a legal architecture to keep them hidden. The Reagan administration, led by George Bush, systematically constructed a legal architecture to hide covert operations from congressional oversight. They took Carter's defensive shield, the continuity of government framework built to survive a nuclear war, and they weaponized it into an offensive sword. They created a shadow government with its own command structure, its own funding mechanism, its own legal justifications, all operating parallel to the existing official government and all technically constitutional. They did it because they genuinely believed that America was in decline and that they were going to make America great again by stopping the Soviets from winning. And they believed, because of their religious beliefs, that they had probably about 2 years to reverse the tide. While they were building this machine in Washington, Bouterse was in Havana learning how many teachers per capita a functioning state needs. And within 24 hours of announcing diplomatic ties with Cuba, Reagan's NSC authorized comprehensive Caribbean basin operations. A nation in Suriname trying to chart its own course after colonialism was being targeted for regime change because Cold War superpowers saw them only as chess pieces. Next time on the Suriname Contra affair, we're going to see how they use this machine. We're going to learn who the operatives were who were arriving in Paramaribo. We're going to learn the labor weapon aimed at Cyril Dahl's unions, the economic pressures, the military plannings. The shadow government was operational, and now we're going to see what they did with it. I want to thank you again for tuning in this week. A couple things, a bit of housekeeping. We've got a number of new subscribers. I wanted to welcome everybody, both here on YouTube, but also on Substack. We've got a couple new paid subscribers, and I want to tell you how much that means personally. There are some expenses that go along with this, both hosting and software and travel and submitting FOIA requests. Any additional subscribers, that money goes directly into making sure that we're getting as much of this information back out into the light that we can. It also is just kind of a good boost. It makes you feel good when you're working on stuff like this to know that this matters to people and people care about this type of research. If you've got this far, I would ask that you go hit the like button. That helps the algorithm serve up content to others. Hit the subscribe so you'll be notified when other information drops. Go ahead and subscribe also on Substack if you haven't, so when we start publishing upcoming articles, you'll get notified about those. If you know anybody interested in this, share this content with them. Share a link to the YouTube channel or the Substack page. If you have any interesting information or research, I've already had people reaching out in the comments about the YouTube channel who were there, who were involved. Firsthand testimony always makes this more authentic. The more data points that we have, the better. Thanks again for joining this week, and we hope to see you again next week. Until then, I'm Matthew Smith, and this is the Suriname Contra affair.